Hi, I'm Mari with Mari Sews, and today I'm going to show you how to make your very own Allison tent dress similar to this one by Jree Desiree, also known as So Much Jazz. So this dress is a really adorable pull-over style with a V-neck that is finished with facings, ruffles on the bottom of the sleeve and the bottom of the dress, and it does have inseam pockets. Also, there's a really nice little pin tuck detail at the shoulder that just adds a little extra element of something adorable. This dress does come in adult sizes as well as children's sizes, so it's perfect if you're looking for something that's going to be a mommy and me look, or if you're sewing this dress for a charity such as Project Dress a Girl. If you are going to be sewing this month for Project Dress a Girl this year, you can get this dress for free this month only by using code PDAG22. That's PDAG22. You can also find it down in the description box with a link to the pattern. And with all of that being said, let's just go ahead and jump right on into making this beautiful little dress. To make this pattern, you're going to need a couple of things. You're going to need scissors, a seam gauge, something to mark on your fabric. I'm going to use this chalk pen, but if you have fabric marking markers or something else like that, feel free to use that. And then you're also going to need pins. You're also going to need your pattern pieces. So you need the front, the back, cut out 2 of the sleeves. You're also going to need the sleeve ruffles, and keep in mind that you're also going to need 2 of these, the bottom dress ruffle, and again, make sure that you have 2 of this bottom ruffle. Pocket pieces, you're going to need 4 of these, and your facings, both the front facing and the back facing. For these, you're also going to need to interface them, so make sure that you're cutting out the interfacing and applying that per the directions. The very first thing we are going to do is stay stitch our neckline to make sure that it does not get warped or stretch out of place. And we're going to do that on both the front and on the back. So stitches that are about 3/8 of an inch down. After you've stay stitched both the back and the front, we're going to have to work on adding in the pleats on the shoulders on the front. So what I'd like you to do is turn over your piece so you're working from the wrong side, and we're going to make our markings for the actual pleat lines here. Now there's a couple of ways that you can do it. I'm going to show you my favorite way. What I want you to do is line up this shoulder here, and I'm going to mark where these lines are on my actual fabric. And then I'm going to move this up so they all match up, fold over my paper, and I'm going to mark where they ended. Okay, and you can see that on my actual pattern piece, I've drawn in those lines on the back side too, so that I could easily reference them. After you've gotten to this point, go ahead and grab a ruler or your seam gauge. And draw them in like that. And we're going to continue to just draw these right on in. Once you have this shoulder, go ahead and do the same thing to the other side. After you have your markings on your fabric, I want you to grab one of your pins and you're going to put it through one end and bring it out the other. Pinch. And then we're going to put it through one side of the line and right out onto the other, making sure that it's coming out directly on top of that line, just like that. I'm gonna do one more. So I'm gonna put it in on this side, and I want it to come out on the line on this side. Now, put it back through on this side and out the other side on the line. Okay. Now when I take this over to the sewing machine, I'm going to start on this end, and I can just pull the pins out as I'm approaching them on this line. And it's a real easy way to make your pin tucks. And when it's all sewn up, this is what it's going to look like on the front. And on the back, you're going to have all of your pin tucks sticking out this way. At this point, you're going to want to take this over to your iron, and you're going to want to iron them all towards the neckline to get them nice and flat. So go ahead and give those a good press, and then we'll move on to the pockets. Now let's attach the pockets onto both the front and the back of our dress. So grab that front piece that you just pleated and find the markings on this side. I put slits in mine. You want to line those up with the ones that are on your pockets. You want to make sure that the right sides are facing here and pin in place. We're going to sew it at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, starting at this notch and ending at this notch. Do that for all 4 pockets. And after you've attached all of your pockets, it's going to look like this. Now the next step for the front only is to understitch your pockets. And so what we're going to do is we're going to press these pockets out like that towards the seam allowance, so that way they're in this position. And after it is pressed out, we're going to flip it on over, and we're going to stitch it again to the seam allowance here, about 1/8 and 1 inch in from this 1/2 inch line. So at a 3/8 seam allowance, we're going to go ahead and stitch right along there. And that's going to keep this pocket nicely in place. So do that to both the front pockets only. And when you're done, this is what your pocket is going to look like, with that stitching right along there. And you should have it on both sides. For the next steps, we're going to attach our front and back pieces together at the shoulders and around the pockets. So let's go ahead and line those up so that way we can pin them together. Now we're going to sew this on the sewing machine. I'm going to start by doing my shoulder seams first, and then I'm going to sew. I like to sew from the bottom of my hems up. So I'll start here, go around the pocket at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, come up and stop here back stitching. And I'll do that on both sides. Okay, and so now the dress is really starting to come together. At this point, we're just going to clip into the corners here to release the pockets a little, let them hang a little. So just clip in at an angle. Do not clip through your stitching. There. And at this point, we need to finish all of the seams that we just sewn. Now you can finish this using a zigzag stitch that goes right on over the edge, and that'll help keep this dress from unraveling at the seams. I'm going to take this over to my serger and give it a good serge. Now let's go ahead and work on our facing. So grab your 2 facing pieces. These should already be interfaced. So if you haven't interfaced them, go ahead and do that and then come back. But what we're going to do now is we are going to attach the 2 facings at the edges like this. Now we're going to take this to our sewing machine and we're going to sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance on both sides, and we're also going to finish that edge and then press it. The very next thing that we're going to do is finish the edge, the outside edge of our facing pieces. So I'm going to run this under my serger and take care of those edges. If you don't have a serger, go ahead and zigzag those edges. Now that the edges are finished on the facing piece, we're going to attach it to our dress. Flip your dress so that it is right side out, and then we're just going to match up that V right there in the center and put a pin there. And then we're going to match up the shoulder seams and stick a pin there as well. I'm going to take this piece on over to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew all the way around at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So at this point, I've finished all of the edges on my facing. You can see that we've got the stitches in there. Now what we need to do is clip into the fabric so that way we can do a little bit of understitching and flip this to the inside. So I'm going to clip all the way down, but not through that stitch right here at the corner. And then I'm also going to snip around this curved edge right here. And I'm going to get right in here as well. Now, if you feel like you want to clip triangles into your fabric, you can absolutely do that at this point. It's probably the preferred method, to tell you the truth, and to do that, all you would have to do is that. Alternatively, if you have pinking shears, you can also pink this edge and not worry about finishing this entire inner edge. Now that this is all clipped, I'm going to take this over to my iron and I am going to just press this facing up like that. And I want to get it away from the main body because we're going to understitch this facing to the seam allowance on the other side. So go ahead and press your fabric up and meet me back here. Right, so now you see here, I've pressed the facing up against that seam allowance like that. I'm going to take this over to my sewing machine and I am going to stitch on this facing piece about 1/8 of an inch away from where it meets up from this seam line right here. So 1/8 of an inch, as much as I can do, all the way around, and it's going to help keep this facing in. So go ahead and take care of your understitching right now. Flip your facing into the inside of your garment. Press your neckline, and then when you're done with that, we are going to stitch the under facing, this here, by stitching in the ditch right in this crease right here and right into the seam. So press it and then stitch in the ditch to secure your facing so that it does not flip out. You can see this facing is stuck there. There's just no way that it's going to continue to flip out. So that is a nice secured facing. However, if you're brand new and you're not quite sure how to stitch in the ditch or don't quite trust yourself yet, it is an optional step, but it is a very nice step. Now, if you're making this dress for charity and you need to sew on a label, go ahead and grab your label. Now, you can either sew it up on the shoulder over here, but I think I'm actually going to place mine right on the bottom, about about an inch up. And I'm going to place it right there. Okay, so I'm going to sew on this label, and then when we return, we're going to work on ruffles. So now we're going to take care of our ruffles. Now these shorter, skinnier strips are the sleeve ruffles, and you should have 2 of those, 1 for each sleeve. And then you have 2 really long strips like this, and these are for the bottom ruffle. Now what I want you to do is go ahead and connect the 2 bottom ruffles together like this. Connect both ends of this so that way you end up with a tube. And because we're trying to take care of as much as possible at one time, go ahead and do that to your sleeve ruffles. So fold those in half so that the short edges are meeting with the right sides together. Put a pin in those. So these and the large ruffle all at the same time with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and don't forget to finish your edges. And when you're done, all of your pieces are going to look like this. At this point, I want you to do a narrow hem on one side of all of these. And so that essentially is folding this over a 1/4 inch, pressing that, and then folding it again, another 1/4 inch, and pressing that down as well. I have one edge of all of my ruffle pieces folded over twice using a 1/4 inch allowance, and I am going to take this over to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew along this fold around all of my pieces. So these are all of the ruffle pieces and they've been hemmed, and trust me, it's so much easier to hem these pieces while they're flat like this. So we've got all of the ruffle pieces hemmed. Now we're going to put basting stitches in all of them. You're going to sew 2 rows of stitches at the longest interval that you have on your sewing machine, unless you have a basting stitch that's specific to your machine. You could use that, but I like to use 2 rows of stitches at a number 6 length on my machine. I back stitch here, I go all the way around, and I stop here, making sure that I leave my threads long so that way I can pull those later. So I'm going to do that to both of the sleeve pieces as well as this bottom ruffle piece, but then we're going to put this aside. Now grab your sleeve pieces because we're going to work on these next. Now you should have 2 that are cut on the fold, and this is what they look like. We're going to find that center notch before we do anything else. So go ahead and fold your sleeves in half and just clip at the very top there. And that is going to help us line it up to the shoulder seam. Do that on both pieces. Next, go ahead and pin your sleeves together with right sides facing like that. And then we're going to sew this at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and don't forget to finish the edges here. And when you're finished sewing it, you have something that looks like this. So now we have our sleeve and one of our ruffle pieces. What we need to do is shorten this ruffle piece so that it is the length of this bottom sleeve part. And you know which side is the bottom sleeve because the top that gets attached into the arm side or the armholes has notches. So make sure that you're working with the right side. I'm going to flip this over to the wrong side, and I'm going to grab those basting stitches that came out the bobbin, and I'm going to begin pulling those. Just easing those stitches on down. Now, I'm not worried too much where the gathers are landing right now. My primary goal here is length and then we can even out these gathers when we get the right length. Okay, and that's good right there. So I am going to knot my threads that I'm pulling on with a double knot, so that way they don't come undone. And then I'm also going to do it on the top side as well. Now we can focus on evening out these ruffles. That's what it looks like for me. It looks like one big old scrunchie. Grab your sleeve. We're going to flip it so that it's right side out, and then we're going to take our seam that is on our ruffle and we're going to match it up with this seam on our sleeve and attach the ruffle to the bottom part of your sleeve. And after that's attached, we're going to sew around this in a 1/2 inch seam allowance and finish that edge. And when they're done, this is what your sleeves are going to look like. Your ruffles are going to be on the bottom and the seam allowances are going to be pressed up towards the shoulder area on both of those. Now let's go ahead and add them to our dress. So I'm going to flip our dress so that it is wrong side out. Take one of your sleeves and find that seam. We are going to insert it into our dress and match up our seams. Now we're going to find our notches and place a pin at each of our notches. And then we're going to find that notch that we made at the very top of our sleeve, and we're going to line that up with the shoulder seam. If you need to ease in any of your fabric, you can start to do that at this point. I just like to do it by splitting the difference and putting pins there. So at this point, I'm going to take this over to my sewing machine. I'm going to sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then I'm going to finish that seam. Super cute. So repeat the process on the other side. Now we need to attach our ruffle to the bottom of our dress. So you should have already placed in your basting stitches. And what I'm going to do now is pull these stitches so that way they match up with the bottom of my dress here. And I'm going to do this in sections. I'm going to do it one section seam to seam, and then I'll deal with the back separately. So you'll see what I'm talking about in a second here. So find where your stitches ended. And let's begin pulling. So here is one seam. And here's the second. Okay, we still have a little more to go. And again, I'm doing this for length. And we can adjust the gathers after we've got the length. No, it's a little too much, so let's just ease that back out. Just a tiny bit more. Okay, that is perfect. So I'm going to tie my knots on the bottom of this. And I'm also going to do it to my top stitches as well. I really don't want this to move. Now let's adjust these gathers to make them more even from one end to the other. Oh, that is just going to look so cute. Now gather the basting stitches on the other side. Now let's attach this ruffle to the bottom of the dress. So find where that seam allowance is, again, on your ruffle. And we're going to match it up with the seam allowance on this side here. And we're going to do the same on the other side. So find your side seam on the other side and match it up with the side seam on your dress. Now continue pinning around the dress. Now that my ruffle is pinned all the way around, I am going to just pin these pockets up so that way they don't get in the way while I'm sewing. Because the last thing you want to do is catch it in the seam allowance when you're attaching your ruffles. Sew all the way around this using a 1/2 inch seam allowance and then finish your edges. And when it's done, this is what the final dress looks like. The ruffle is finished. There are no loose threads hanging out, and if there are, I'm gonna snip those away. You all, the inseam pockets are just completely adorable. This dress is definitely a winner, and it's going to make some little girl feel really special wearing it. And there you go. You just made your own really nice Allison tent dress. Now, if you made this dress for Project Dress a Girl, make sure that you take a picture of it and post it on Instagram, tagging me at Madi Sews for Curves and using hashtag Project Dress a Girl 2022, so that way I can help give you some love and keep count of all of the amazing dresses coming in. And I really do hope that you had a wonderful time making this dress. Let me know in the comments below what your favorite part of the dressmaking experience was. And you all, until next time, I sincerely hope that you find joy and have a wonderful day.